Thank you, Snow, for sponsoring this episode of the Coffee Podcast. I drink a few cups of coffee in the morning and another at night on special occasions. I've learned coffee is great for my health, so I'm left with the challenge we all face as coffee enthusiasts who love to smile. That's where Snow comes in. Their solution is backed by $1.4 million of research and development, caters to those of us with sensitive teeth, and shows results just after 3 days. Get 15% off your first order at trysnow.com for a limited time with the code COFFEEPOD. You're listening to the Coffee Podcast. This is the Coffee Science Series. Coffee and my diet. This is our last installment of topics on coffee health. Marissa Silver is a registered dietitian in New York City. The typical work of a dietitian, she tells me, includes assessing patients' and clients' nutritional needs and developing plans for them. We start this conversation with a simple question. When we talk about coffee in this context, are we talking about black coffee?
So oftentimes when I'm working with clients, they'll tell me that they drink coffee, and it's definitely not something to be ignored because oftentimes people put a lot of excess sugar, a lot of artificial sweeteners or flavors in their coffee and, different creams, different milks. So the caloric content and the nutrition of a cup of coffee could really vary from person to person. There's definitely you're still getting the antioxidant benefits from drinking coffee in the first place. But if you're adding, I would say, 3 tablespoons of sugar and lots of cream, and then you're putting whipped cream on it and sprinkles, suddenly you have more of a milkshake, and it may counter all of the benefits that you want to get from the actual coffee itself.
Okay. So I think to be safe, as we continue to talk about coffee, maybe we just talk about it in the realm of coffee in its purest form, which I guess would be, pure being open to interpretation. We'll just say just black coffee for now. And that could be, I guess, espresso or drip coffee or things like that. No milk added, no sugar added, coffee.
Totally. I think that's fair. I'll say one thing, there's nothing wrong with adding something like an unsweetened almond milk or unsweetened nut milk. There are so many good options out there. There are also, there's nothing wrong with adding a little bit of a regular type of milk to give your coffee some palatability. But just the biggest things when it comes to drinking your coffee every day is make sure it's not a way to it's not having so much sugar in it and excess saturated fat from cream and whipped cream and stuff like that. But otherwise, we can totally just talk about coffee. Mm-hmm. I just think it's important to help people understand that they definitely can have something in their coffee. It's just choosing the right thing.
Got it. Okay. And for now, whenever I say coffee, I'm going to assume black coffee unless we say otherwise, just to keep the conversation clear. What I'm talking about is not going to be typically a latte, but actually a black coffee. So when I form questions towards you about different things about maybe our diets or things that we might talk about, that's the angle I'll be coming from. So if you want to augment what I'm saying by adding, and you could this or that with adding something, I'll let you kind of drive that boat. I would like to ask, I know we sort of skipped over this and I didn't intend on doing that. What exactly does a dietitian do? Let's give our listeners some context about your work and your field.
Sure. So I would call myself a food therapist in a way, because a lot of people, while I am trained, I've done a ton of clinical training and in the hospital setting and in doing academic coursework on medical nutrition therapy. So how to help people eat to prevent and to manage and live with chronic diseases. A lot of times in practice, people, they know what to eat, they can Google what to eat, but they often have trouble implementing that. So a lot of my time is spent counseling people and helping them figure out a personalized way to eat healthy and feel good and do it in a way that works for them. A registered dietitian does two things. They help people by educating them on evidence-based ways to eat for either a nutrition problem. So it could be gastrointestinal issues that are related to having a disease like ulcerative colitis, or blood sugar control related to having diabetes. So the first piece is always educating someone about how they should eat and what to eat. And then the second piece is counseling people and having an ongoing relationship with them to help them meet their goals.
And so it sounds like your work is focused in the non-hospital realm on educating clients, but also sort of walking through their dietary choices with them. And is there some kind of measuring involved there as well to get feedback, or is a lot of that feedback measured from the client and saying, hey, I feel this way or that way? What does that kind of look like?
Yeah, so there are different types of approaches that I'll take with people. Some people, I take a more data-driven approach at first. So we may want to get a sense of tracking how many calories someone specifically needs to help them lose weight. And the way we would do that is first taking a few days, having the person track their calories without restricting. So just 3 days of calorie counting to see how much they're eating. And then the average of that would be the amount of calories that helps them maintain weight. And then from there, I would work with them to reduce that calorie amount to try to lose weight if that's the goal. Other people, if we're talking about weight loss, I guess that's where I started. If we're talking about weight loss, other people do much better with feeling better in their genes. So instead of focusing on numbers and, on calories and pounds, we more focus on healthier behaviors, such as adding vegetables and fruits to your diet and maybe cutting back on sugar and soda and stuff like that. And then realizing over time, I feel a little lighter today in my jeans. I feel more energetic. And in that way, we help them get healthier. But really, it depends on the person.
It. Okay. No, it's really helpful. And thank you for giving me some context as well. I do want to talk about coffee, obviously. This is a coffee podcast. And I just feel it was important to get some context there about where you fit in the realm of, I think in your role in the realm of coffee science and coffee, specifically health science, and how coffee plays a role in a healthy regimen. So let me first ask you, what is a balanced diet? I've definitely heard this, I've read it in the news, or I've seen it growing up.
So a balanced diet includes your basics, which are whole, minimally processed foods from the following groups. So it's fruits, vegetables, whole grains, legumes. So that's like beans or soybeans like edamame, seeds, and nuts. Those are the components that build a healthy diet. And then what I would also consider part of a healthy diet are foods that give us pleasure. So making sure that once you have your basics down, you're eating, that nostalgic chocolate cake that your mom always baked you on your birthday, learning how to enjoy that as part of your daily life in a way that's moderate and not overdoing it. But food is not only important to help you meet your daily needs, so minerals, vitamins, calories, protein, fat, carbs, but also food plays a huge role in culture, right? And the way we communicate, the relationships we have with people, the way we just live our lives is often centered around food, especially I live in New York. So a lot of our culture is focused around going to a coffee shop and having a bite with a friend. And part of a healthy diet is, how do you incorporate a latte and an afternoon treat in your diet that also helps you meet your needs? It's always this balance of enjoyable, pleasurable, and meeting your nutrition needs.
Let's see. We have this idea of your basics, and then we have this idea of like pleasure foods, things we enjoy to eat. So I have that right so far. I think. So if I'm looking at those, it makes sense to start with the basics and then work my way to things I enjoy. Would you say coffee fits in basics, or is that more of a pleasure? Or does it depend?
So I would actually consider that's a plant. So that's actually plant foods. That's part of your basic diet. So
Okay.
coffee
Okay.
actually has polyphenols. It's a plant component that has high antioxidant properties. So similar to, spices, fruits, and vegetables, there are antioxidants in coffee, and they do similar things to your body that eating other plants do. They help protect you against free radicals in your body. They do a lot of stuff for, I would say, help preventing disease like chronic disease, so cancer. They help with cognition. So coffee is known to give you that cognitive benefit. There are studies that show it helps prevent against, some of the neurological diseases such as Alzheimer's. And I'm sure we'll go into that later, but it's important to know it is a whole plant food that should be one of the basics in your diet. It doesn't mean that everyone needs to drink coffee, but it is, in my mind, similar to other plants that you would include in your diet.
Okay, so it would be fair to say coffee can be considered partaking of something from a plant, which can fall into the basics category and not necessarily the pleasures category. So if I was to say, I've hit all my basics for the day, and I'd really like to have a coffee with sugar and milk in it, something really that's going to hit my my category, the pleasure realm, right? Then you would say, okay, I'm probably making decisions that are in line with a balanced diet because I've got my basics covered, but now maybe I have a coffee that is more like a milkshake, right? And say, well, that's okay because I've covered my basics and I'm being reasonable about my choices. We had an audio issue here, so I'll summarize what was said. Marissa made the point that she did not intend to be so black and white. Your basic foods can also be your pleasure foods. The example she used was delicious roasted Brussels sprouts, and I know what she means because I could eat a truckload of tasty, crispy Brussels. Anyway.
It could certainly give you all of the benefits that a plant food gives you, but you can absolutely find it as a pleasurable experience as well. So there's a lot of crossover between those things.
What is the role? So we talked about coffee and its plant-basedness, because I know that's very sciencey to say that. It's plant-basedness and how it helps us to get antioxidants into our body. What are the roles of antioxidants for our body? Like, why should we hear that and go, ooh, that's a good thing?
There are compounds in plant foods, such as coffee or tea or a raspberry. They all have different types of antioxidants in them. They're compounds that actually protect us against oxidation and free radicals. So we live in, a free environment. There are lots of different ways that we can be exposed to oxidation, free radicals. You may have heard of people trying to stay away from the char on the grill or, certain metabolic processes that go on in our body can cause these free radicals. You could read a whole textbook on all of the different ways that we come into contact with oxidation and free radicals. But what those compounds do in plants is they kind of serve as a barrier to those compounds and protects us against them and prevent damage from those compounds. Those compounds have a role in multiple diseases, such as an inflammation in the body. So diseases such as heart disease or neurological diseases or cancer progression, those things, we want to protect against and the development of disease. We know that if we eat more of these plant foods with antioxidants in them, it'll help us protect against all of the different diseases that we may be at risk for, if that makes any sense.
So it plays the role of sort of a defender or a protector in our body. This is what it sounds like if I was going to put it in Jesse terms. Now, let's touch on the topic of research. I know that you probably have to keep read up on things that you're advising clients on or patients on whenever you're in those different environments. When it comes to reliable research relating coffee to human health, what kind of research should we look to, and what would be sort of the recommended process for looking for research like that?
Research in nutrition is very new. I'll start with that. Most of the studies that are done on food and how it affects our health, they're not causative. So that means we can look at populations, we can find associations between things. So we may find an association between
Okay. Mm-hmm.
living longer and, eating more vegetables. But we can't say that eating more vegetables caused someone to live longer. Unfortunately, we're not really at a stage where we have enough research where we're doing randomized control trials. So if you think of a typical randomized control trial, you may think of like a drug study. So you have a bunch of patients, you give one group of patients a pill, you give the other group of patients a placebo, so there's nothing in the pill, and then you see if there are any changes based on giving the person the drug by looking at those two groups of people. And we can't
Okay.
really do that in nutrition science because it's so hard to isolate someone and feed them something and not and put them in some vacuum sealed room and then and give someone else
Right.
something else, because there's just so many different factors that come into play when you're looking at a diet in someone's life. That being said, there is more research being done. They're finding ways to do more of these randomized controlled trials, so hopefully we'll get some data there. I think when it comes to looking for good research, a few ways to do that is look to see, first of all, who's sponsoring the study. So I would say some research is funded by certain companies that it's in their interest. So if you're looking at a study about how red meat is really healthy for you, and then it's funded by, the farmers that are producing most of the ground beef in our country, like maybe you should take that with a grain of salt. So it's like all about like who's funding the research. The same thing would go for a clinical trial, and who's funding the drug, similar thing. The other thing you want to look at, what type of study is it? So if you look at this, at a huge study, and it's done in a really big population, it may be a little bit better than looking at a very small study that was done in like 20 people, right? Because it's more representative of the population that you're studying. Cool. And then there's a few other different factors. Is there a control arm of a study that might be helpful? I mean, a lot of the research also you want to look for in some of the more established journals. So JAMA, the New England Journal of Medicine, that's a really good journal. They'll have some nutrition data in there. The Academy of Nutrition, that journal is, of course, our gold standard for dietitians. So you want to look for sources that are gold standard. The best place to look for nutrition research is in PubMed. So that's a really good place to search for research and find. If you're looking for coffee research and you want to see what it does to the body, you can find a ton of research there.
Thank you for giving that advice. Finding the resources sometimes requires some expert experience too, to even know where to find stuff. So I appreciate that. My next few questions are going to be very pointed at some topics I was told you're familiar with in the realm of coffee nutrition. And so I'm just going to sort of ask you point blank about these things and let you talk about it. So the first one, the first one's going to be, how does coffee help with our cognitive function?
Coffee, as you may notice from having your first cup in the morning, it definitely makes you feel more alert. And that's because it has caffeine in it. So we know that moderate amounts of caffeine in your diet can actually be beneficial to your cognition. You can drink a cup of coffee and it may help your performance, and that has been shown in exercise. So it'll help you have a better workout. You'll work out, I would say, harder, quote unquote. Be maybe more focused in your workout. The same thing goes to your studies. So if you're sitting down to read something or you're trying to be productive at work, you're more focused, you're more alert. And if if you're getting that amount of caffeine that's optimal for you, you'll have better performance. If you get too much or too little, it could affect your performance. So if you're drinking way too much caffeine, then you're all, jazzed up and you're getting that jittery feeling, like it's not gonna be as helpful.
Yeah, I'm sure a bunch of baristas listening know that feeling pretty well.
So what's really interesting is that everyone, based on their genetics, metabolizes coffee differently. A person might be, downing, 8 cups of coffee and doesn't affect him or her, but you're sitting there and you're, getting all jittery from having 1 cup. So we know that people, based on their genetics, can tolerate different levels of caffeine. So it's really about trial and error to find out how much caffeine is right for you.
And I can already see how that would play a major role as variable in research, right? If people's metabolisms are so different, then controlling for that would be really difficult, I would imagine.
Yeah, exactly. So that points to one of the problems with, nutrition science, but with any kind of research, it's like we all metabolize things differently based on our genetics. And, coffee, you can, on top of genetics, you also build your way up to tolerance too. So
now, when we talk about something like moderation, or when you say a moderate amount, is that also going to depend?
There is a recommended level. The recommended amount of caffeine per day is about 400 milligrams, but that varies based on person to person. So if you feel, I really think it's more about, how you feel and if it's affecting your health in any positive or negative way. If you're doing great and you're drinking, 4 to 6 cups of coffee, then by all means do it. If you're doing it in a healthy way without too much sugar, too many additives, and it's not affecting your sleep, it's not affecting your mood, it's not giving you gastrointestinal discomfort, then you can have more coffee. If you're someone who is a little more sensitive to coffee, then that's where I might help you with trying to find the right amount. But in overall, coffee and caffeine at, I would say, 4 cups to 6 cups a day is part of a healthy diet. That being said, there are stages of the life cycle that we're not going to recommend caffeine and coffee. So if you're a teenager or you're a child, we're not going to recommend coffee. And if you're pregnant, there's actually a lot of news around how much caffeine pregnant women should have. Most recently, it was about 200 milligrams, and now the recommendation is none at all. But in general, if you are pregnant, it's better to have 1 cup or less a day, and we know that seems like it's been a safe amount for people who have had children for many, many, many years.
Yeah. The topic of fertility in coffee is also a conversation as well in these circles. What is there to know there about how coffee may affect fertility?
Yeah, so it's interesting. Coffee does not affect fertility. So don't feel like if you're trying to get pregnant that it's going to mean that you have to give up your caffeine hit. There's no research to show that it negatively impacts fertility in any way. So if you enjoy your coffee, continue to drink it, and there's no harm, no foul.
That was kind of an easy one, just a straightforward, hey, don't worry about it. There's no reason to worry about it if you want to continue drinking your coffee. Okay. There are a lot of consumers or non-consumers of coffee. They're non-consumers because they believe maybe false things about coffee. Is there anything that bothers you about the communication, generally speaking, the communication of coffee and health, or how it's been perceived over the years, or what have been your experiences and your observations about people's misunderstanding about how coffee may affect their health?
It gets a bad rap for, in a way. I think people think of caffeine as this drug and they compare it to other drugs, and I don't think about it that way at all. As the research has continued, the more positive stuff comes out about coffee every single day. Like we're realizing, okay, it helps with exercise. It helps with, cognitive functioning. It helps protect against disease because we're finding these, polyphenols and these antioxidant properties of coffee that are really good for our long-term health. And also all of this research about anti-inflammatory diets, and that would include foods with antioxidants in them, like coffee. So we know that it's helpful for fighting against inflammation. That being said, I think a lot of people will associate some of the side effects of coffee, which is like similar to anything that you may eat in excess, because it has a substance in it that makes you a little more alert. If you overdo it, you may have GI upset. You may have, coffee it makes you pee. It has that effect on you. So people will feel a little dehydrated if they drink too much coffee. But that being said, I think there's like that you could say the same thing about all different types of foods. And if you overdo it, you may feel pretty yucky. You sat there and you ate, I would say, like 10 cups of broccoli, you would feel really gross because there's so much fiber in broccoli and it would really upset your GI tract.
Oh, okay.
So it's a similar thing. It's like if you overdo anything, you're going to feel some side effects that aren't so great. I think the real key about diet and health and drinking coffee is just having the amount that works for you and incorporating it in your diet in a healthy way, and you'll feel good and do your best. Another interesting thing to note is if you look at the cultures that drink a lot of coffee. So like I know Japan, they drink a ton of coffee. They're a really healthy population, right? They have all of these different ways of making coffee, and you probably know way more about it than I do. But so those cultures are really healthy, and they're drinking coffee as part of their diet. And I think of it as Americans, we're always struggling with, our standard American diet and how do we, what do we eat? What do we do? And it's like, look at these cultures that enjoy healthy foods in moderation, and they drink their coffee, they socialize. One of the big things about coffee is the culture around it. So when you have your coffee, a lot of the times you're enjoying it with friends in outside, you're sitting outside a coffee shop, you're in the sun, you're getting your vitamin D from the sun, and you're interacting with other people and you're having a conversation. And that's really important for our health, is the fact that coffee brings us to the table to sit and enjoy life and socialize with other people. I think the cultures that live the longest, that's a big part of their culture, is just, human interaction. The other thing that's really interesting in New York, and I've seen it in other areas, but I'm really only know mostly where I live, is a lot of the new coffee shops that are opening are also having a lot of healthier food choices that they serve with their coffee. So I see a lot of overnight oats. I see a lot of avocado toast. I see a lot of, I would say, healthy things to order with your food. And in a way, coffee shops are driving food choices. So coffee shops play an interesting role in what types of foods people are buying and eating on the go. And I think
I never thought of it like that before. That's really cool, actually.
I think a lot of times people will go to grab their coffee and then they remember to buy, their lunch or their snack or something. And if the coffee shops are selling healthy options with the coffee, then that means people are acting, healthier. And, even if you look at Starbucks now, they're offering all of these new healthy foods. So I really think coffee culture is playing a huge role in our society and, definitely affects our health.
So we want to know a little bit about what are you currently working on, and how can our listeners be a part of that?
Yeah, so I currently see clients at Kalina Health. It's a private practice here in the greater New York area. I see patients virtually now because of the pandemic. So if you're interested in checking me or my team of dietitians out, it's kalinahealth.com. I work with an amazing group of women, and we counsel patients on everything from hormonal issues to weight maintenance and weight loss to eating disorders to gastrointestinal issues. Really, we run the gamut, and we're always happy to help people with, their nutrition. And we can always have a good conversation about coffee. Definitely comes into play often. I think the best piece of advice I've ever received is I'm going to have to make this food related, but you have every single day you wake up, you have a new meal to make better choices at. So you always have an opportunity to nourish yourself and your body. And so you can always think about every day is a new day, and I'm going to wake up tomorrow and grab a delicious cup of antioxidant filled coffee and a really nourishing meal to feel really good.
If our listeners walked away, say they forgot everything we talked about, that would be very sad. But if you wanted them to walk away with at least one thing from our conversation, what would you want that to be?
Enjoy coffee in moderation to maximize the health benefits, I would say.
Now that we've concluded that coffee is generally good for our health, I think it's time to jump into some topics like coffee and chemistry. What is actually going on when we're brewing our coffee? Stay tuned next week for conversations with members of UC Davis. Thanks for tuning in, and as always, and until next time, happy brewing.